climate is the biggest topic for our generation. If we don't solve climate change, if we don't manage this whole transition of our economy and our society towards sustainable technologies, to me it feels like we don't really have to address all the other things, because then we're anyway lost as a society.
Today, we're talking to Ruth Bosse. She's co-founder and CEO at Ark Climate, a software helping cities reach net zero. Welcome, Ruth. Ruth is great to have you here. Ruth is actually from Germany, and she studied mathematics in Munich, Berlin, Paris, and Sweden. And then she decided to also do an MBA and started her career at McKinsey, where she eventually focused on climate topics like decarbonization and adaptation. And after that, for the last 1.5 years, Ruth has been building Ark Climate with her co-founder. And that's a company offering software for cities and municipalities, which is super cool because we haven't touched that topic here. And the platform actually enables carbon accounting, lever identification, planning, implementation, citizen participation, and it's for now focused on German cities. And just to give you a little bit of context on the development of Ark Climate, they just raised a 1 million pre-seed round in November. Congrats on that. And now they have a team of 6 people and 6 cities and countries as their customers, generating around 300,000 in revenues. That's so impressive. And if that's not enough for you, Ruth is also doing her PhD in parallel, focusing on impact of sustainability measures on the economy and the climate. That's very impressive. You're our first PhD candidate on here, and I'm sure we could fill 2 hours. And our challenge today will be to make it short, like keep it short in 30 minutes. I'm happy to have you here and welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so we will start off with some intro questions to get to know you and your journey. Can you briefly introduce yourself and share what inspired you to work in the climate space?
Yes, of course. So hi, I'm Ruth. You already said a lot about my work background. Maybe just adding on that, I also grew up in a very political household. My parents are both politicians. I started doing politics at the age of 13. And I always felt like if you want to change things and you want to work on important topics, you just have to get active. And I always loved being that, like doing that, especially within politics as well. After a few years at McKinsey, I had this moment where I felt like, okay, this is fun and I learn a lot and all that, but I really want to work on like something really important and not just help companies make more money. And for me, climate is the biggest topic for our generation. If we don't solve climate change, if we don't manage this whole transition of our economy and our society towards sustainable technologies, to me it feels like we don't really have to address all the other things, because then we're anyway lost as a society. So this is a bit how I went into climate, how I went to this journey. This is why I have built up the climate practice at McKinsey, why I started my PhD in this field, and also why it was clear that if I build a company, it's going to be in that space. And it's great for me that Ark is actually kind of bringing all this together, right? Like I can do the tech part from my university. I can do work on climate, work on politics, build up my own company, work with amazing people. So I'm very happy where I am right now.
Amazing. Thank you for that introduction. Before we jump into some more specific questions, do you have a definition of climate tech?
Well, I think my definition would be very basic. I think it's any kind of technology, hardware or software, which just helps us reduce emissions. Can also be more in an enabling way, help us move towards a climate neutral future.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, so starting to double click a bit on your journey with Ark Climate, we always start out by asking how you identified the opportunity. So, how did you decide to focus on cities and municipalities?
Yes. So the first thing is that at McKinsey, I was already working with cities on climate questions, climate protection, and also adaptation. For example, together with my team, we created a climate strategy for the city of Stuttgart. And another topic is obviously that I also was working in politics, and I saw how bad the software landscape is in our public administrations, especially the smaller ones. And then adding on that, my co-founder Michael is a software developer with a strong focus on how to build easy to use, intuitive software, which obviously is also really amazing for this customer group. So putting all this together really led to us trying to address this issue, like seeing the bad software in the public sector and saying, okay, we feel like we're really a good fit to solve this issue. We started talking to lots of different cities. We got amazing response. I was just cold mailing mayors of huge cities and they took time to talk to me. So we definitely figured out that this is a big issue, and now we're on the way, like building solutions for the issue.
That sounds amazing. And so as you're telling it, was it hard and to move to the an MVP and the product market fit, or was it fairly easy in this case because the need was so large?
I think it was easy is obviously a strong word, but I think it's harder in other cases. Let's put it that way, because the main thing we're doing now in the beginning is bringing the tools that are standard in the public and the private sector, as for example a carbon accounting tool in the public sector, right? So the tech behind it, obviously you have to really understand very well the reality in a city hall, like how are they doing carbon accounting, but also their day-to-day life differs from the day-to-day life in a company. It's not for now the big tech innovation that we bring in there. It's more like changing the way they work and actually providing them with tools they didn't have access to before.
Great. And one follow-up question on that. Is it easy to find the right frameworks? So, a company would work with SBTI and it's pretty straightforward. Was it hard to find the right frameworks for the cities?
No, it's very easy actually. There is the greenhouse gas protocol, the international framework, and then there's in Germany the BISCO standard, which is the standard from the Umweltbundesamt. I don't know how to say in English. And those are the standards they use for accounting. And then even for the strategies, there are I mean, if you do your climate strategy in a certain way, you'll get a lot of subsidies. So most cities do it in that way. So even for the strategy, it's very standardized, and also for the way like the implementation happens and all that, it's very similar from city to city.
Cool. That's so interesting because I think most of us coming from the company side haven't really thought about what they would use and what kind of framework there is. That's great. Before we pivot into like how you're defining impact, etc., we wanted to ask whether there was anything that you faced that as a startup that was different from if you had just built another regular software startup. So is the climate journey, has that been more difficult, or were there some extra challenges there?
I feel like for me, it's even easier to build in the climate space because I feel like people are so supportive and they just want to see you succeed because we all are tackling the same bigger issue, right? And even like there are two competitors which do something similar to us. And even with them, we're on very good terms because we all say, no, but we need to bring this type of software in the cities and we need to help them reduce emissions. And obviously, I would love them to use my software. And I also think it brings more benefit. And there is a reason why I built another company in the space. Another is big when there are three companies in the world, but still, I still feel like it's because we are all on the same mission. People are so supportive, and you meet incredible people who are just purpose driven and obviously also ambitious and all that. But I feel like the network is just amazing within the climate space. At least for me, the way I like to work, which is more collaborative or like a, let's say, like if it's competition, more in a like sportsmanship competition style, for me that works easier in the climate space.
I mean, that's such a great takeaway. So sometimes founding in the climate space is easier because of all the support and because it's a new and fresh field.
Yes,
That's great.
yes, we have to increase this market together, right? And then we all can take our piece of the cake. If the cake's big enough, like, we can share.
That's such a lovely definition, Ruth, and I definitely echo it. As a new founder, everybody has been so supportive and cheering for you and sharing resources. So it's just such a wonderful space to be in, especially starting a company for the first time, at least in my perspective. Speaking of impact and balance, how do you balance profitability and climate impact in your business model? Of course, there's the public sector angle as well, which is quite interesting. So could you give us a little color on how you think through that?
Yeah. I would say that in our case, it goes actually hand in hand, right? The better our product is, the more it helps the cities reduce emissions, which is a bigger climate impact. And the better we're at, like at selling, the more cities we work with, the more cities we can help reduce their emissions, right? So for us, it goes really hand in hand. And obviously it's not always the case, but I think that's also the idea of the climate transition of our economy, right? That we have to build technologies which are actually climate friendly and better than the current technologies. So I think in the best cases, it should always go hand in hand.
Right, absolutely. In terms of measuring success, is there an interesting set of KPIs that you track? For example, given this is public sector, is it specifically tracking towards healthcare benefits and public health? Or are there any other interesting metrics that you could share with us?
Yeah. I mean, obviously we're early stage startup, so it's still a bit messy and we're just setting up our processes and our tracking and everything. We ourselves measure success obviously with like lots of also financial KPIs and KPIs such as how many cities do we work with, how much do they use our product, how much do they like it. We have one climate KPI which we call emissions under management. So we look at all the emissions of the cities we work with combined, and right now it's about 1% of the German emissions, and obviously the goal is to increase this. And long term, I would also love to track more how much impact we actually have on emission reduction, but we're just not at the stage yet where we can track that. Another thing in terms of KPIs is also that we help our clients set up KPIs, and our software enables them to set them up and to measure them over time. That can be emission reduction. That can also be other KPIs such as energy savings, healthcare benefits. Obviously, if I don't know, if people cycle more or stuff like that. So that's like an indirect KPI tracking how we can also measure success.
That is so interesting. What do you think is the biggest blocker to scaling across cities right now?
To me, right now, it feels like it's my time. Because I just don't have enough time to talk to all the cities. I think the thing we still have to crack is those tender processes. I feel like the first part of the sales process, which is very similar to B2B, actually a bit easier because it's very easy to find the right people online. It's very easy to get recommendations because obviously cities are not competing like companies. Getting into the discussions, lots of people in administrations also have the time to go hop on a software demo with you, and they know due to their budget planning if they have money or not. So the first part of the process, you have way higher conversion rates compared to B2B companies. But then in the end, you often have this annoying tender process, at least if you sell at a certain amount of money. The challenge for us right now is to really make this as efficient as possible. And we're right now also exploring different AI opportunities to leverage them.
Yeah, AI agents for the win once again.
Yeah, an AI tender employee. That would be perfect.
That would be great. Someone needs to build that. Speaking of, if you were chatting to somebody who's aspiring to build in the climate space, how would you advise them to navigate the waters and figure out what to build?
I think the first thing they should do is just try to talk to as many people as possible. That's also how I got started, and it was super helpful to just figure out like what are the biggest topics within climate, what's been built already, where do you think you find another solution. I mean, obviously it also depends a lot on like the depth of their knowledge. They might also have to learn more about like where the emissions actually coming from, because there are also obviously a lot of companies not focusing on the issues which are most emitting. Yes, and then maybe, but that's probably a general thing for founding, also focus on what you actually want to build, right? Think about like a thing that really inspires you, that is really important to you, that you're willing to put in a lot of work, a lot of worries, and all of those things which come with building a company. And also think about like, why should you be the person building this company? Because either it's not a good idea, then you shouldn't do it. But if it's a good idea, there are going to be other people who also want to build it. And then you need to have some kind of edge into the market that others don't. So I guess that's the general advice for people who want to build a company, but it obviously also holds for climate founders.
Right, absolutely. Are there any resources or tools or anything else that helped you and you would recommend to others?
Yes, in the very beginning, for me, it's also my first startup. So in the very beginning, I had to learn a lot about like how to build a company. And I really like the resources from the Y Combinator. They have videos, blogs, articles, all that around how to find a startup idea, which ideas are usually work out, which don't, how to find a co-founder, how to get started with sales, and so on. So I think that was super helpful around building a company. I want to also recommend like one thing my old employer McKinsey published, which is called Net Zero Europe. If you're interested in like where are actually emissions coming from, I think it's a very easy to understand, not too long report that you can read through and you see, okay, this is a big bucket of emissions. Here we already have a technology, here we don't have a technology. How I started was I looked at where are the emissions coming from and where is the stage of the technology, or if the answer, it doesn't always have to be a technology, right? It can also be a change in behavior, such as like cycling or so. And then really looked at like, okay, if there is already a technology developed, the issues are probably more you have to bring it in the market and maybe innovate and create a new business model or something. Whereas if the technology is not mature enough, you have to build more for like maybe hardware R&D heavy startup, and then that's also a good starting, or that was a good starting point for me to figure out like where do I actually want to focus on.
You being a former consultant, I'm not even going to attempt to challenge your process because that was a step-by-step playbook. Is there anything at all that you would do differently now that you know how the steps worked out? Is there anything you would do differently if you had to build?
Yeah, maybe one comment. I feel like I'm the most chaotic person in our team. Everyone else is so much more structured than me, and there is just one other ex-consultant in our team. So you might be able to challenge me on my structure for sure. But I need a bit of chaos to, I don't know, to feel alive. Or to feel like I'm not spending too much time on like structuring. But on your question around like what would I do differently? Actually, one thing I did in the beginning is focusing on a few cities, on a few kind of promising clients, and really work super close with them. And I think what I would do differently is start a broad outreach. Doesn't have to be a sales outreach, but just like to talk to way more cities in the very beginning. We did that to a certain degree, but more on the interviewing side, not that much when we were really co-developing and selling and all that. There we focused on a few cities, and I feel like we could have started sales earlier if we did that earlier. And also part of the product, I think, is it was a bit too much focused on what one client wanted. And I guess that's like a classic thing that happens. But yeah, it also happened to us.
Yeah. I think it's one of these stones that many people trip over, and then you quickly learn that a custom build is not super scalable, and you go
Yes,
back
it
to the
didn't feel
drawing board.
custom built at all though, because we always felt like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense. Yeah, for sure, all the other cities need it as well. And then I talked to other cities, and they all said, yeah, we need it as well. But then when you start to sell it, you're like, okay, so they said they like it, but they're not buying it.
Another interesting product market fit
Yeah.
realization.
Yes, it's super exciting journey. Also, given that I'm not a software developer, so for me, it's always way more about like figuring out the problem, understanding the customer. But then this, like, okay, is the solution actually fitting? Are we actually hitting it? Is the point, the part which is more new to me.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little more about that dynamic? Because there's also a tendency of more of a technical founder starting a company, and then maybe they're not super well versed in the business side, where here you have this really good collaborative co founder team. Is there anything that you learned through that relationship, or did you already work a ton with software before?
So I specifically wanted a co-founder who can build the product. I wasn't too set on a software company, but I was set on a product company. And I didn't want to build it with like, let's say, for example, another consultant or so, and then hire a developer team. So that was really important to me. And I think it really pays off. The thing that was surprising for me, I mean, I'm still a mathematician. I can code and all this. So I have somehow of an understanding of software. Like I never thought how much emphasis you have to set on design and front end and how things should look like. And if the customer, and not only for it looks nice and professional and the people are going to buy it, but for it actually to be usable. And I've never thought about software this way. I mean, we use so many tools, right? But you just use them. You never think about that there is so much thought put into like how are people actually interacting with software. So I think that's definitely something where I would probably always need someone help me. Like I could much rather learn how to do the back end stuff than the front end stuff, I'd say. I think that's yeah, that was super interesting to learn,
Hmm.
and I'm very grateful. Like Michael's super good at that. Like that's really good.
A dynamic duo made in heaven. Is there a good place where folks can connect with you or learn more about your work? Any PhD proposals you're writing or anything else you're working on?
Yeah, actually, the PhD is a bit on pause right now. There's not
Okay.
that much happening with the PhD. There is enough happening at Ark Climate in the moment. But for sure, I think easiest is if they just look me up on LinkedIn, can send me a request or follow me there. And then whatever they're interested in on Ark Climate, I think they can just check out our website. It's ark-climate.de. That's probably the best sources, yeah.
Awesome. And if they want their city to get going on GHG emission reduction, then they should call their mayor.
Yes, definitely. Or also someone just working in the city hall. Maybe they have more availability. Usually
Right.
there is in every bit bigger city or municipality, there is like a climate manager or someone with a title like this.
Can you tell us a little bit about what's next for our climate and what are you most excited about?
I think we're in a very interesting stage right now. The one thing I'm super excited about is like growing the team because it was Michael and me bootstrapping for like a year and a half more or less, and doing everything yourself is it's very intense. Also at McKinsey I was a project manager, so I was not at the place anymore where I had to do all the small things by myself. And just growing the team, we managed to convince amazing people to join us, so I'm super happy about that. This is something I'm really looking forward to because I also, one reason why I founded a company was because I want to create an amazing place to work. I want to, like, Arc should be this place where people are just happy to work. Obviously not every day, that will never happen, but in general, like, your work impacts your life so much. So having this opportunity to have this impact on people in a good way where they have fun, they work on something impactful, they learn a lot, they connect with great colleagues, building this place, that's something I'm very excited about. And then maybe also transitioning a bit from like everything's founder led, like we're doing everything by ourselves, to setting up proper processes, being way faster, obviously with the bigger team, being a bit more professional, while it's probably still gonna stay very chaotic.
Yeah, well, that's the nature of startups. Are
Yes.
you hiring or are all the seats filled? Should we put in a plugin for people to join?
We're actually still hiring for two positions. One is a sales rep, and one is a climate expert, somebody who will help us build the expertise around like the climate action that will fill our product, our projects.
What is the impact number for cities and local governments in terms of GHG emissions? I'm just curious. So if everybody transitioned, do you know what that would represent in terms of impact and cut?
Yeah. So one thing is obviously that every emission in Germany, let's say, happens in one city, right? So if all the cities would be climate neutral, Germany would be climate neutral. But then obviously there are lots of things that don't happen on a city level, but it's more due to national regulatory, EU regulatory, and so on. So what is most relevant for the cities are the emissions that they can impact. And that is a bit more than 100 megatons in Germany out of like 800-ish megatons in total.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's a good chunk of things to do.
Yes.
Awesome. Sorry, I jumped around a little bit, but I realized we never talked numbers, and I feel like, especially talking to a former consultant and mathematician, you gotta put your numbers
I
in
like
there.
numbers. Thank you very much for having me, for letting me share my background.
Thank you, Ruth.